Hey everybody, it's Spin, and today we're going to be testing PEEKER'S advantage in Valorant. So first, what is PEEKER'S advantage? The short explanation is this. It's the advantage that aggressive players have when playing FPS games online because of the way data is sent. Imagine with me, you're playing Valorant and you peek a corner. The server shows you what's around the corner, like an enemy player. Now the server says, we should probably update your position. So it takes your position, updates it, and then sends it over to your opponent. That delay in information is PEEKER'S advantage. You get to see the enemy before the enemy sees you. But Riot is claiming to, quote, go to war on PEEKER'S advantage. I decided to measure this with the power of science. Actually, not really. This is very much a real world test. This is not laboratory grade testing, but we tried. This is the part where I ask you to subscribe because you are f***ing awesome. Here's how we did it. We used two machines, one in Boston and one in Nashville. Both players had excellent and consistent connection with the Boston ping at 28 and the Nashville ping at 35. Both machines recorded at 1440p at 128 FPS. Why 128? Because the server tick rate in Valorant is 128, which means the server updates players' locations 128 times a second, and I didn't want to miss out on any of that juicy data. We synchronized our screens by using the in-game timer. We mainly tried 3 different scenarios. One where 2 players were equidistant to an obstruction and a player wide peaks, one where a player was close to an obstruction and one was far, and vice versa. The only one of these that will accurately measure PEEKER'S advantage is the first test. In the other two, something called angle advantage comes into play, which has nothing to do with netcode and everything to do with how the game is built. More on that later. We originally tested this with Jett and Sova, but we realized that you can see Sova's cloak before you can see his hitbox, so we ran it again just as Jett, since her clothing is quite close to the actual hitbox. A final note, the Boston PC only had 120Hz monitor, whereas the Nashville one was 165Hz. There may be a drop frame every once in a while on the Boston PC, but this doesn't corrupt our data since both were recorded at 128 FPS. I verified this by making sure the sync was maintained at the end of all the clips, which it was. But real quick, let's talk angle advantage. What you need to know is that angle advantage is the very real concept of gaining an advantage over an opponent that you peek or peeks you, depending on who is further away from the corner or thing obstructing them. Whoever is further from the angle will gain an advantage and might be able to see their opponent before their opponent sees them. Okay, now that we've satiated the nerds with our inevitably flawed process, let's look at the results. Scenario 1, equidistant players. Something interesting is that the visual indicators that an enemy is present is almost perfectly real-time in both perspectives. This is because when our player model strafes, she rotates her hips and flings her legs forward, so we can see her sneaker peeking out. There's likely some player prediction programmed into this too, which helps with that. But PEEKER'S advantage is still very much present. For the purpose of this testing, I want to simply measure when each player has the opportunity to take a headshot. In our testing here, the Boston PC has 8 frames to take a headshot when the Nashville PC does not. So 8 divided by 128 is 0.0625 seconds, or 62.5 milliseconds. The average human reaction time from humanbenchmark.com is 284 milliseconds, so lumping 62.5 milliseconds onto that matters. Keep in mind, this is simply the amount of time in which a peeker sees your head before you see them. If the peeker has an op or a rifle, they will have to stop or slow down to fire. If as the defender, you're stationary, that buys you a big chunk of time off that 62.5 milliseconds. Scenario 2. Close and equidistant. In this scenario, the peeker and the defender were equidistant, but nearly touching the obstruction as the attacker wide peeks. The attacker could see the defender well before, and the attacker could see the defender's head 117 milliseconds before the defender could see the attacker's head. Scenario 3. PEEKER'S advantage and angle advantage. In this scenario, we position the 2 players so that the attacker has both PEEKER'S advantage and angle advantage. The peeker was able to see the opponent way before the defender, like 900 milliseconds before, which is crazy. And the peeker could see the opponent's head 218 milliseconds before the defender could see the opponent's head. Scenario 4. PEEKER'S advantage and angle disadvantage. In this scenario, the attacker has PEEKER'S advantage but does not have angle advantage. The attacker and defender have visual indicators of each other at about the same frame, and the attacker can see the opponent's head for only 5 frames before his opponent. That's only 39 milliseconds. In this scenario, I think I'd rather be the defender as I'm already stationary and ready to fire. As long as my crosshair is correctly positioned, this should be an easy fight to take. So, in conclusion, PEEKER'S advantage is still very much real in Valorant, but Riot seems to have this under good control with their netcode and 128-tick servers. What does this mean for you? If you're peeking, you want to gain both Peeker's advantage and angle advantage. If you're defending, find smart angles where you can gain angle advantage against your opponent to even the fight. Additionally, I want to thank everyone ahead of time for being polite and kind in your critiques here. This is a real world test, not a closed off lab test with like hazmat suits and whatever. This isn't going to be perfect. Also, thanks to my buddy McStamos for helping me out with this. If you like this stuff and you want to see more, go ahead and like and subscribe. It would mean a lot to me. Peace and love, everybody.